Greetings, everyone, and welcome to today's research forum focused on artificial intelligence. This forum is supported by the Office of Research and our Vice Provost for Research, H.A. Carrington. I am Karen Fletcher, Director of Grants, Resources, and Services in the Office of Research, and I will be your host for today. These research forums are designed as an opportunity to build our research community here at Appalachian. It's a space where we come together and share research being worked on in different disciplines, yet on the same topic. The Office of Research will assist in identifying external funding opportunities around today's topic. If you are interested, please reach out to us at grs@appstate.edu. Previously recorded research forums, and this forum will be uploaded as well there, are located on the Office of Research's YouTube channel. I am excited to introduce our guests today: Andrew Davis from Communication, Paul Wallace from Leadership and Educational Studies, and Mitch Perry from Computer Science. And our first presentation will get started with Andrew Davis, and it is entitled Artificial Intelligence and Corporate Power. I'll turn it over to you, Andrew.
Hi, thank you to the Office of Research for inviting us here, to the other panelists, and to all of you who showed up to participate. My research on artificial intelligence is admittedly a bit unorthodox. So I want to make sure at the very beginning to say that I am not talking about the academic development of AI. I believe that scientists, engineers, and developers around the world are doing an extraordinary amount of work on AI projects that have great potential to benefit humanity. My research, and therefore any of the critical comments I make here today, are only focused on the corporate-led development as determined by top-level executives at companies such as Alphabet, Meta, and the like. And rather than being concerned primarily with the development of artificial intelligence in and of itself, I focus on the contradictions between the public understanding of AI and the actual conditions of its corporate development. Public discussion about artificial intelligence tends to fall into one of two categories: utopian or dystopian. And on the one hand, corporate and futurist narratives tend to focus on the technical advances being made, the greater efficiency and freedom these technologies will bring to our lives, and the instrumental applications of AI, without a sustained consideration of their ethical and cultural consequences. Think of any Apple ad or Steve Jobs pep rally ever. But on the other hand, popular culture abounds with fantasies of future societies in which humanity is overrun by authoritarian technocracy. We see this in movies such as Terminator and Minority Report. And although many of the conclusions of my research may seem to fall into a dystopian perspective, I hope this is not the case. I am an optimist in my heart, if not quite one in my brain. I'm just trying to provoke a more honest and transparent discussion about the current state of narrow artificial intelligence and where the push to develop artificial general intelligence is potentially leading us as a society. I want to add a cultural perspective to the instrumental logic that dominates public discourse. And in order to do that, we need to understand the consequences of our current understanding and our current modes of communicating about AI. Because whether it presents a utopian or dystopian perspective, public discourse tends to reflect a belief in what is referred to as technological determinism. The belief that, one, technology is the primary force in social change, that our social and political problems will ultimately be solved by new and better technologies, and two, it posits technology as a kind of autonomous evolutionary force beyond human control, that it is, in a word, inevitable. But working from empirical research and theoretical perspectives developed in communication, media studies, and science and technology studies, I would like to shift our focus to what we refer to as a social constructivist understanding of corporate AI. Technological progress is always the product of human choices, actions, and agendas. It is driven by political, economic, and even philosophical assumptions as much as it is by the need for practical solutions to social problems. It is also driven by the unintended consequences and accidents inherent to human behavior. And as such, AI needs to be considered as a social issue as well as a technological one. And because of this, we need more informed public oversight on its development. Based on this research and this perspectives, we see that the push to artificial general intelligence is not, as commonly claimed, driven by a need to solve social problems or by a desire for greater connection. The human agendas driving this development are instead corporate and metaphysical, relating to, on the one hand, the question of sovereignty, or which institutions should have ultimate authority in society, as well as a belief among particular corporate technocrats in the inevitability of what is known as the singularity, or the eventual merger of human consciousness with networked computing technologies. The singularity refers to the supposed future merger of human biology and consciousness with computing and robotic technologies, so that humans remain relevant beyond the, again, supposed point when general AI surpasses human intelligence. Put simply, it is the quest to make humans immortal. Some humans, anyway. I understand that this sounds strange, but this is precisely the stated goal of corporate futurists such as Sergey Brin, Peter Thiel, and Ray Kurzweil, to name a few. And they tend to speak of it as if it is an inevitable evolutionary process instead of what it actually is: the intentional desire of powerful people to preserve their wealth and social control beyond their mortal lifespans. And this preservation can only succeed through the legal form of their corporations, because the transnational corporation is the only institution in modern society with, one, the economic and political power to potentially exert sovereign authority greater than that of the nation state, and two, the legal mandate to operate uninterrupted beyond the lifetime of any human member of that institution. If this agenda is allowed to continue unchecked, we may very well experience a future society in more akin to Huxley's Brave New World or Neil Stephenson's Fall than either Orwell's 1984 or the promises of the latest iPhone ad. Now, that being said, none of this is inevitable. Based on my research, I'm not convinced that the future envisioned by these corporate actors is even possible. The current state of developments in narrow AI does not logically support a belief in the possibility of artificial general intelligence in the near future as predicted. But the people in control of the development of corporate AI believe this, and they are the ones with the money, influence, and corporate backing to make it happen if it is even possible. So what we need to bring to public discussion is a critical but non-dystopian ethical consideration of the political and economic power of major technology corporations, as well as transparency and accountability when it comes to the people who set the agendas for future research in AI. We need better public transparency precisely because these decisions affect all of us, but they are being forced on us largely without our consent or even a reasonable public consideration of their command over public life. Our smartphones, our social media accounts, our web searches, in many cases, our jobs and our healthcare, our ability to communicate and form meaningful social relationships. Indeed, the majority of contemporary life in this society increasingly operates within the global networks of corporate-controlled AI to some extent. Again, this is not inevitable, but the discussion needs to happen now so that we may deploy the advances of publicly funded academic research for the public good in a way that does not cede civic sovereignty to corporate power. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. Our next speaker is Paul Wallace from Leadership and Educational Studies, and his title is Applications for Social Robots. That's all you, Paul.
Hey, thanks. And again, I'd like to express my thanks to the Research Office for inviting us today, and also for everyone showing up here at lunchtime. I wanted to, again, I was doing this earlier, I just want to test my other webcam. I've got one behind me. Oh, good, it's still live. And I've got a example of a social robot here that I'm going to pull out at the end of this and show you some of the capabilities of those. But first, I wanted to talk about that. So I will go back to my screen. Can I share my screen?
Yes.
Okay. I have a couple of slides. I like to keep some notes to keep me on track. So if you can see this.
Yes, we can.
Okay, that's great. All right. So I'm Paul Wallace. This is my 14th year at App State. I teach in the Department of Leadership and Educational Studies. My field is instructional technology, so using technology in teaching and learning. And I want to run through a little bit of background in social robotics, what it is, definition, and some examples of the fields that we're working in, and then an example of a robot and an interaction with a social robot. So I think we all understand the concept of robots, and social robots, I'm a little bit unhappy with the term, because robots in general is just so broad that when you talk about working together with robots, people often think of something like a factory robot, an industrial robot. But my little niche is in this bottom right-hand side, which are the social robots. But we have lots of different robots, or things that we call robots in our lives. We have, of course, in factories, we have industrial robots. Some of you might have cleaning Roombas in your house, definitely in hospitals. They're employed, especially during the pandemic. Surgery, medical robots. So these are telepresence robots, like the one on Mars, or the ones that have been to Mars. But social robots, that's my field, or part of my field. And there are lots of different ways to break this down. I tend to look at them either as human-like or having human-like attributes. Those are the ones that I'm most interested in. But there's a whole group of those that are more toy-like, and some are literally toys. And then there's some that move, and then some that are more stationary. So I have examples of both. I don't have examples of both here in my home office, but I'm working with both types of those. What is a social robot? Just a really basic, it's a robot that works or is designed to work together with people. But a little bit more, really it's a computer. All right, so really it's a computer interface that's designed to interact with people, to facilitate this idea of co-presence, or the feeling that we're together. And we get that co-presence here in Zoom somewhat, but we get a little more powerful feeling of that when we're together in a room. And I'll get into that in a minute about the idea of embodiment, or having a physical presence. The idea of a social interface, so this definition of social robots is being a robot in a social interface, or together with the social interface. Thinking about interfaces, our computer interfaces, your desktop, your laptop, generally has an interface metaphor that's a desktop. And the desktop you have, on the desktop of your computer, you might have files and folders like you would maybe on a real desk, trash can on the side. So the social robot is an interface. It's a computer interface for us that would facilitate natural interaction with the robot, like we would have in a social situation with other humans. So some of the aspects of that might be social interactivity, or socially interactive, able to communicate in a way that humans do. Some social, quote, intelligence, or able to pick up social cues and adapt accordingly. And autonomy, or being the idea or the feeling of the robot being autonomous, in that it can control its own interactions, or self-control, not being controlled like Wizard of Oz from behind a screen and someone doing that for it. Our social robots are part of a group of computer devices that would fit into the concept of artificial agents. And I think you're probably mostly familiar with the voice assistants. I bet a lot of people here have a voice assistant in their house or in their room right now, or even in their office. We're pretty familiar with the, I don't want to say the name, but the Amazon Echo device and Google device, and Apple also makes one in other countries. There are other brands. And the latest figures I pulled up just recently were from 2019 that show about 1/3 of the homes in the US have one of these smart speakers. So if we have smart speakers, why do we need social robots? Why do we need a face? Well, first of all, the physical embodiment is a very important part of that immersive experience. And also the human face is really our natural interface to social conversation, social experiences, right? It's our most primitive interface, right? That we're used to conversing with a human. So you can't get those with voice only or video interactions. Also, there are avatars or screen-based digital agents. And there's been a lot of studies that find that the physical embodiment, having that physical robot or that physical computer with the human-like attributes, is a very powerful thing. So it's important. One of the most important things, just jumping back a little bit here to this idea of the social interface where you have social interactivity and intelligence, is natural language capabilities. And this has been something that has really come along in the last few years as a result of artificial intelligence, is natural language processing and the ability to understand text and spoken word in a way that humans do or can. And part of that speech recognition. So the robot being able to understand, quote, understand, or being able to identify words that are spoken aloud and convert them to readable text that can be acted upon. And also the other side of that is text-to-speech generation. So being able to turn text into, and this is important, is fluid, natural sounding speech. So not really artificial sounding, but more, as much human-like as possible. And those have gotten a lot better over the years. And especially the cloud-based services, and the ability to tap into these cloud-based services has been a really important thing too, such as the Google Cloud and Amazon Web Services, and things like that. Applications, a few of these, this is not all inclusive, just some that I've been, well, either know about or have been involved in. Training's a big one, so I'm in education and training. So an idea of using a social robot for simulating a character to practice social situations is important, or a widely used way of employing social robots. Retail, it's been several years. In fact, I was looking at this photo just before this, trying to figure out when that was taken. That's my son, he's about 5 there. And he's 11 now, so that was, in fact, I think he was 4. So about 7 years ago in Japan, SoftBank, which is a telecom company, employed these robots called Pepper. They bought the company that developed it, and they employed these in all of their stores throughout Japan. So that's been used in order to help customers. The idea is to guide customers to certain locations in the store, or to personalize promotions to each customer. Education, it's a big one. I do a lot with schools and robots. And primarily social robots now are being used in STEM in order to teach students robotics in order to program, because they're very intriguing. You bring a robot into the school and kids are just really interested in that, and they want to get their hands on it. And we talk to them about, okay, well, let's learn how to program that so that you can make it dance, or you can make it sing, or play an instrument, or play soccer. So they would learn some skills in programming and also other STEM skills as a result of their interest in the robot itself. And then also in therapy in schools, children with autism, there have been a lot of studies, a lot of research is being done with special, the one on the screen there is called Milo, but other robots that are being used to work with children who in some cases prefer to speak with a robot over a human or a computer avatar. And some of that has to do with the idea of judgment. So these students don't feel like they're being judged by a robot, so they're willing to work on some skills that they might not want to work with a human, which got me interested. So talking a little bit about research. My research for a long time, even before I came to App State, 15 to 20 years now, has been related to affect, particularly affect, so emotion and computing. And I worked a lot with virtual reality and how people felt about being virtual characters and working with other types of virtual characters. So that's extended into social robotics and also looking at anxiety. So those two things together, how do we feel about working together with these human-like machines? Some of the research I've done takes a look at, I don't teach foreign language, but it's an interesting field to look at because students have to participate, they have to talk. So I've done research looking at practicing foreign languages, practicing with a conversation partner, human and robot, and students that score high in foreign language classroom anxiety, which has been studied for years. I found that reported less state anxiety working together with social robots as conversation partners. So that kind of leads back to that idea of not being judged or not feeling like you're being judged, but willing to practice and take it seriously because of that embodied robot. I've also created prototypes of several different things, again, language, but again, I don't teach language, but it's an interesting thing to work with, especially because some cultures have different gestures and being able to program those so that you can work together to understand those. And again, simulation. In a research study, I've done a pilot study, and I'm just going to go back hopefully soon and do a little bit further investigation into social anxiety, communicating with a social robot versus a human communication partner. And there have been a couple of studies published, especially one recently. And I just wanted to put it on the screen here in italics. It's an interesting study about participants with higher social anxiety feeling less anticipatory anxiety. That is the feeling of something coming up. And tension when they knew that they'd be interacting with robots than humans. And it's in a journal called AI in Society, which I think is a really fascinating journal. So I just wanted to throw that out there. It has a lot of different kinds of research related to artificial intelligence and society. Okay, some examples, and I won't spend too much time here. This is a robot that I have in the office I've had for about 6 years. This is the one I work with schools a lot with children. And it's very interesting because it's mobile and it allows anyone to program it, but it does have the capabilities. It has some natural language capabilities, but they're not very good and they're not cloud-based. So they're built in. And again, this robot I've had for about 6 years, and it was probably designed 10 years ago. So there have been a lot of advances in those areas since that time. So I've recently acquired a really powerful, I think, robot that's called Furhat. That's the name of the company. It's a Swedish company, and also the name of the robot itself. And it has some very interesting features. I've got it here on my desk in front of me, so I'll show you those, but I hope if everything works, which is asking a lot sometimes with technology. But what is intriguing about the Furhat is that it has a swappable face mask that's made out of plastic. So you can just take the mask off and put a different one on. So right now I have the adult mask on there, but they make children, they make non-human. I think there's a dog mask. And the face itself is projected from the inside like a multimedia projector, right? So it casts the face onto this mask from the inside. And it can have lots of different, you can make your own textures, or you can, they have several that come with it for different race and ethnicity, and some that are non-human looking. Right. So there's lots of differences that you can have and lots of different characters. So if you're simulating different things, it can be very interesting. Natural language capabilities are all cloud-based. So you can decide which one you want to use. If you're a Google person and you use their cloud-based natural language processing services, you can choose those or what have you. And it comes with a couple built in, but you can select different ones. You can record your own gestures. And expressions, a lot of them come with the robot itself, but as you're developing an application and you need a different kind of gesture or the way of someone moving, you can record those using Apple's AR Kit, which is a technology for doing things like that. It maps the face. Other things, natural, human-like. So the idea is to make this as natural and human-like as possible, with the face, with the different languages, with the different voices that it has, and the neck movements and those types of things as well. So I think I can probably turn it over. I'm going to stop sharing for just a second, and I'm just going to share a different screen, hopefully not to confuse you, and
we have a couple more minutes for you.
Okay. Show you the interface. Maybe you can see now, this is actually a web-based interface that you're seeing what the robot sees. And you can see that it's identified my face. You can see kind of a green rectangle. If actually it's able to identify several different faces and it can control them, you might be able to see a number over me as 0. And if there were a couple other people here in the room, it could identify them also and try to keep track of them, even in the voice conversations. And just notice over here that there are different characters that I can select that have different facial features and also different voices. So right now I'm just going to play this.
Hello, I am a speaking robot.
So that's Matthew, and that's a US accent, but I could just jump down here to Enrique, which is Spanish.
Hola, soy un robot que habla.
Okay, so lots of different kinds of languages and capabilities built into that. And over here, the gestures, but that would generally be done, not just selecting those, but writing an application and having those gestures based on different kinds of input. Okay, now I'm going to stop sharing and I'm going to switch, if I can, to my other webcam. Oh, because it's still live. And then there's the robot right in front of me. And I just wanted to show what it would look like if I were to interact with it. And I have to run a skill. So just 1 second.
Hi there.
Hey.
I was recently introduced to the AI GPT-3 from OpenAI. Have you heard about GPT-3?
No, I haven't.
GPT-3 is a so-called language model developed by OpenAI. It can be used to generate any text, for example, a conversation, based on the description of a character. Are you ready to try it out?
Yes.
You can choose to speak to one of these characters.
And I'm going to stop there because I know we're short of time, but there are a few built-in kind of AI type of interactions that you can have. I'll switch back maybe to my other camera here. And also, of course, you can build your own applications, which is what I'm doing for the research that I'm doing with that. Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Paul. And the name, what was that, Matthew? Was that who we were talking to as well?
Well, it depends on the character. Yeah, the name of the robot's Fur Hat. The idea was it didn't have anything but a face in the old days. So there was a lot of mechanical stuff. So they just put a fur hat on it to cover up all of that stuff. But it's not a bad name.
No, it's one that'll stick with you. But thank you very much. Our next speaker is Mitch Perry from computer science, and his talk is entitled Separating the Signal from the Noise. Over to you, Mitch.
Thank you, and thanks everybody for coming and participating in this discussion. Let's see, let me share my screen. So I am a computer science professor. I've been here, this is my 10th year. There we go, okay. So my research in computer science in general, the big picture is we're trying to learn what is computable, right? What can we do with computers? And if we can do it with computers, then the question is how can we do that? So sometimes it's possible to prove that something's possible, but then not know how to actually do it. And so I spent a lot of time trying to figure out how to make the computer help me solve a problem. And so when I was asked to participate in this forum, my first instinct was, artificial intelligence, well, I'm not sure that I do that. And because what I was thinking is this next slide, I was thinking of, Marvel superheroes, and I was thinking of, this grand vision for AI. But there is this classic test about what makes a good AI, the Turing test. And the idea there is If a computer or if a human is forced to interact with an AI or a human through some portal that makes it difficult to tell physically, if it's an AI or not, could the back and forth communication reveal whether it was a human or an AI? And if the human can't tell the difference, then that would suggest that there's some form of intelligence behind that portal. And at a minimum, according to the AI textbook that I use, I do teach a class called AI, is natural language processing, knowledge representation, which is how do we store information in a good way. Automated reasoning is sort of thought of as problem solving using the information that we have. And then machine learning, how do we learn from examples, right? By experience, by going out and seeing things. And that's a minimum to try to get at something that sounds believably intelligent. And then something called the total Turing test then is if you were to interact with this AI in person, what else would it need to be a convincingly intelligent example? And that would be computer vision and robotics. And so thinking of Marvel's vision, I mean, that would be an example of something that is indistinguishable from, or perhaps indistinguishable from a human in many contexts. So what do? I don't do all of that. I don't claim to be an AI researcher, but I do spend a lot of time in an area called machine learning. And the first talk was about some misconceptions about AI and how it's portrayed in the public and that sort of thing. For me, machine learning isn't that the machines are learning, right? That we're giving the power of learning to machines. It's really that we're using machines to help humans learn. And that's how I use machine learning. I use it to help me understand the world better through the eyes of a machine learning scientist. And that broad area, I may not even claim to be a machine learning researcher because I have a niche. We all have niche areas, and so we have two broad categories of machine learning: supervised machine learning and unsupervised. And if you think about supervised machine learning, that's where you're given examples and you're also given some kind of label that says, hey, this is what a frog looks like. This is what a dog looks like. This is what a bus looks like. And if we're given examples and their labels and their names, then the challenge becomes, can we find some mapping from new examples to the name that we wanted to spit out? And that's a very interesting, and a lot of advances in machine learning recently have been on the supervised side. So if you think about image classification, if you think about speech recognition, face recognition, all of these are supervised machine learning problems that there's been a lot of advances in. Unsupervised is a little bit different. Unsupervised, there are no labels. And so if you imagine, your 3 or 4 year old child watching cars go down the street, maybe they haven't seen a bus before, but after they see a few of them, they realize, hey, that's a thing. That's something that exists and I've seen multiple times. I don't know its name, but it exists. I know about it. And that's what unsupervised machine learning is about, is trying to kind of understand the distribution of things in the world. What should I be surprised at when I see it, right? And that can help us answer those questions. So when I started in this area, I was focused on a very small slice of unsupervised machine learning, and that's called blind signal separation. And the easiest way to kind of describe that is the cocktail party problem, where if you're in a big room with lots of people, which of course we don't do anymore, but if you can still remember a time when we could enter a room with a lot of people and listen and hear all these different conversations going on at once, it can be challenging to hear the conversation you're a part of, right? And so we have some selective attention that we can use to focus in on one of those conversations. Now, trying to get a computer to do something like that, we can provide one or more microphone recordings and try to disentangle the contributions to each one. If you think about placing a microphone in that room, it's going to pick up a little bit of every conversation. But if you put enough microphones, then hopefully we can figure out and be able to separate out or to remove some of the background noise and really focus in on each one of them. Another application of this area, which is relevant to my PhD research, is separating musical notes from a mixed recording of music. So if you have a live recording of instruments in a room, can we then separate those instruments back out to say remix them in a new way. Even that area is fairly broad, applying signal separation. And I really focused in on one particular way called non-negative matrix factorization, which is a particular technique, a statistical technique that helps decompose matrices, basically tables of data, into the linear combination of simpler tables. And to see what that looks like for audio, this next slide, if you've ever opened an audio file in Audacity or another audio editor, the left figure should be familiar. It's showing the sound pressure levels over time, and big changes in sound pressure levels mean very loud sounds. On the right is a time frequency representation that is showing time on the bottom kind of x-axis, and then frequency on the y-axis. And for musical notes, there's usually a fundamental frequency, which is the lowest horizontal line. And then at integer multiples, we get more of those. And so this quite nicely can be represented as a single shape in both frequency and time. And I'll show you what I mean. For a piano note, for example, there might be, on the left, we have frequency again, but now we're just looking at frequency by itself. We have a fundamental frequency on the left, and then at multiples of that fundamental frequencies, we have other peaks. And this shape tells us something about what it sounds like, right? What is the pitch of that instrument or that note? And then on the right, we see the other axis, which is the amplitude axis, and it's showing this sharp attack and then a kind of exponential decay on the amplitude side. Different instruments produce notes differently, and they just look different, both the frequency representation and the time representation. And this non-negative matrix factorization is a way to start with the mixed recording and try to separate out those pieces. All right, so here's some separated musical notes from audio. This was a stereo recording of 3 different instruments, and then showing how it can separate out different notes from different instruments. And because the instruments were mixed differently in the stereo image, then we can kind of figure out that these different components are coming from different spatial positions between the left and right channel. So I did that for my PhD. I was really happy with it. And I thought, boy, that's really a narrow thesis. I wonder if I'll ever get a job. And so I interviewed for a postdoc in a biomedical engineering department. And I found out that there's tons and tons of data that looks a lot like this, but it's not music and it's not audio. And these techniques are useful there too. And the more experience I've gotten with it, the more I've realized that just about any data that you would collect is the result of a combination of factors. And those factors, if you could recover them, would be in a sense separating those components. So some other areas where I've applied this signal separation ideas is mass spectrometry images, which are really fascinating, really interesting ways to collect data that give you thousands of data points that tell you about what chemical compounds are present, and then also spatial information about where they appear on an image. We're applying that now to beehive audio for a recently funded research project. And that one is really exciting. We're using some deep convolutive neural networks to do that. And I've also applied it to even DNA. You don't think about G, C's, A's, and T's as being linear combinations or combinations of anything. But if we think of it in terms of ancestral populations, each of us comes from one or multiple. And so for all sort of a mixture of these ancestral populations, could we infer the ancestral populations from a lot of individuals' DNA from the current time span? In fact, we can. And so it's kind of an interesting problem there too. And then another example of imaging with quantum dot imaging. So I'll just show you a few results of those, that unmixing. This is a mass spectrometry image of a Tylenol tablet where my colleague had written the letter A. It's a little hard to tell that it's an A, but had written the letter A in Sharpie on top. And by using this mass spectrometry imaging technology to collect this data cube and then applying the source separation to it, we're able to find 3 different materials. And the first material is the Tylenol itself. The A on the right is created from the Sharpie chemical distribution. And then there was also a contaminant on there. He believes he may have brushed the edge of the Tylenol tablet with his hand while he was doing this, and unintentionally contaminated it. We've been applying that to Beehive audio. Actually, one of my students has created a tool, a web app that allows you to explore Beehive audio and run this source separation routine and extract components and look at those. And he started labeling them. When he hears a truck go by, he labels that component and says, this is what the frequency looks like when a truck goes by. This is what the frequency looks like when a lawnmower goes by, when a plane flies by, and all of these anomalies that we didn't know what they were, but it was something interesting we can go back and listen to and find out what those are. And the ultimate result or ultimate goal being to start to recognize when a beehive is operating as usual and is in a healthy state versus when it might be deteriorating and might need some intervention to make it through the cold winter. Here's an example of that, the DNA analysis, and the work that I did sped up the leading algorithm by 2.5 times and was able to get very similar results. And so sometimes in computer science, it's not just about getting the answer, it's can you get it a little bit faster? Well, then, that's good too. And then this is another one. This is instead of a mass spectrometry image, this is a microscopic image of hyperspectral image of quantum dots, and this is able to unmix the contributions from multiple different quantum dots. They fluoresce at different wavelengths of light, and so the same principles can be applied there. And then I've done a lot of this source separation stuff, but as I've continued in this career, I've been drawn into more machine learning topics, trying to be helpful on collaborative projects. And here are a few of those just to highlight. So one of those is looking at gene expression microarray data, which is data that tells us about which parts of our DNA are active at a certain time, creating biomolecules, and that can be a pointer to whether we're healthy or we're responding to or reacting to a disease. Also some text analysis from scraping public Facebook pages and TripAdvisor attraction pages. There's just a few slides on this, and I can see that I'm about out of time, and I really want to make sure that we have time to discuss this. So I'll kind of skip through these more supervised machine learning topics and ask for some questions or some discussion in general with the other two speakers as well.
Thank you, Mitch. Appreciate it. I thank you all, before we start our questions and answers, for your presentations. It's been really interesting to see such a diverse topic, but they all are related.